Elevator systems. Bowen family systems theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, where we look at Bowen family systems theory in brief and understandable ways. Season 4 is all about topics that go from mild to hot in terms of relationship tension. And unlike the old saying to not bring up sex, politics, or religion, we are going to talk about all of them this season, starting with religion. And our guest today is Matt Steele, who joins us from Australia. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. It's great.
Matt Steele is a Bowen theory coach and pastoral supervisor. He grew up in Sydney, Australia, as an eldest brother with 2 younger siblings in a family that he describes as being very close. He is married to Claire, and they have 3 young adult children. Matt is also an ordained Anglican minister and worked in a range of church ministry roles before shifting into his current work. Matt is an associate faculty member at the Family Systems Institute in Australia and now works primarily with Christian pastors, leaders, and communities through his business, Changeroom. Now, this is fun. Last year, he delivered the keynote talks at the Family Systems Institute's Systems in Ministry Symposium, titled The Emotional Ecosystem of Ministry, Navigating the Relationship Jungle Without Becoming a Predator or Being Eaten Alive. Very title. Evocative. And he's just returned from facilitating a 3-day retreat where he was teaching Bowen theory to Bible college students in South Australia. So you may be a little tired from travels and teaching, but this is like top of mind. Matt, you get the first pitch on Bowen theory and religion.
Great. Just a little topic to try to pull down into a pitch. I was thinking kind of generally, I suppose, I was thinking about it in terms of I'm both a spiritual being and an emotional being. And these 2 realities are distinct, but they intersect in some interesting ways. And so my faith helps me to be more differentiated. And my systems thinking and my efforts to be more differentiated also helps me grow in my faith.
Oh man, I'm excited then to talk more because I know I'm next, and I am going to give a disclosure that I'm a bit nervous about this topic, as I know I'm sitting across from a couple of people who have thought more about this than I am. So I have decided today I'm taking a position of a little curious outsider, a person who will admit to not having taken as much time to get clear on my own beliefs around religion and religious practice, but thank goodness we always have time to do more thinking. But I did do a pitch. So my pitch for this week is a question, and I want to think about reactivity around religion. And we record this in a time in the world where the American president is in active conflict with the Pope. So I thought this was just a timely topic. So my pitch is a question. So does a religious practice of any kind or denomination encourage or challenge us, similar to the work on differentiation, to manage self and not other? Can this assist one in being more thoughtful? And I'm going to define thoughtful because I had some feedback how that can be a word that can mean lots of different things. So this could include having more consideration of others, taking time before responding, or looking to multiple sources of information before deciding what we think. So that's the question, which I think aligns a little bit with what Matt is bringing today. So I'm interested to hear more. Dixie, what have you got?
Great. I have 2 short elevator pitches, and unfortunately between those 2, the elevator gets stuck. So I have 2 short things and then something long in the middle. So here we go. Bowen theory helps us observe how relationships influence what we believe and how we live out our deepest values. Pitch 1. Now we're stuck. I think Bowen theory offers a helpful framework to think about and observe religion. A family diagram can show the presence or importance of faith across time. Individuality and togetherness gets you thinking about where one's beliefs come from and perhaps what sustains them. Differentiation looks at what it means to have one's own beliefs while being in a group or across different groups. You can think about cutoff when someone leaves their faith, over and under functioning when 20% of the group does 80% of the work, not just a religious experience. Or triangles when someone insists that God is on their side. And then there's the influence of anxiety on everything I've just mentioned. Okay, elevator's moving again. Next little pitch. With religion, we often get caught up in the content or truth of what one believes. And I think that's certainly important to think about. But Bowen theory is not really about evaluating the veracity of a faith claim, but looks at the facts of how people function or operate within that religious framework. And I will say I just use a whole lot of jargony Bowen theory terms. So if you want to learn more about those terms, season 1 and 2 really digs into defining some of those big words.
Dixie, I was thinking you hit every concept, I think, in your pitch.
We're done.
Almost. Because we were stuck. Okay, from the Murray Bowen Archives Project, he wrote in a letter in 1966. He says, "Dear Mrs. So-and-so, in your letter, you wondered if I could advise you a course of action for you. That's easy. All your life, you have had all kinds of different advices. Your problem is in finding a course of action that works for you." And I thought, well, that kind of defines what we're trying to work on with religion. But he goes on, "You could also make a project out of being aware of the difference between feelings and beliefs or principles. You tend to act on what feels right, and when one consistently acts on feelings, one increases the depth of the dilemma. There are times when feelings and principles are contradictory. Unless one can act on principle and take a stand against feelings that cry out in an opposite direction, then one is stuck." Okay, and then one more pitch. Ed Friedman has written a lot of things, but Generation to Generation is one of his classics. And in it he says, "All clergymen and clergywomen, irrespective of faith, are simultaneously involved in 3 distinct families whose emotional forces interlock. The families within the congregation, our congregations, and our own. Unresolved issues in any of them can produce symptoms in the others, and increased understanding of any one creates more effective functioning in all 3. Okay. There we go. What do each of you notice? I think there's so many different things we're picking up on, but what stands out? Where to start?
Yeah. I have 2 things that are related. One, I guess, from that last quote from Friedman, as I think about the intersection between my kind of spiritual religious life and my kind of emotional kind of life, it's interesting to notice there's a connectedness there between that issue of families that in my experience, I think of the church community I'm part of as a family, as Friedman was sort of saying, and then it's made up of families, and then we all bring our own kind of family of origin to it. And so there's some connections for me there as I think about my own kind of functioning within my actual kind of family of origin that I grew up in and other families. So that intersection that's happening. And then kind of as part of that and behind some of the other things in your pictures, just thinking about then the togetherness force, particularly that's at play behind, say, maybe the reactivity that Katie was talking about, and some of your parts, Dixie. And I think for me, that's been a really helpful thing to start to notice within a religious or my Christian kind of context. To be, it's easy, like you said, Dixie, to think that it's just about the content that we're on about, like the spiritual content maybe that we're on about, but then to notice that actually that life happens within this emotional context where there's these forces at play that we're reacting to sometimes without noticing them. And so, those sort of reactivities that you both talked about kick in.
Yeah. What about you, Katie?
Well, I was also picking up on the reflections on individuality and togetherness to really use those ideas as a resource to me to understand and think about my own functioning. I believe that there is a mature and immature side of togetherness and individuality, and thinking about how how these groups, and really what you picked up on, Matt, and Ed Friedman's, like all these interlocking triangles with all, those different groups acting together, and how do we think about how we show up in that togetherness from our more mature self? I mean, I think that's the challenge in any group. And really, these faith communities are groups, right? Groups of people coming together with a shared, maybe, understanding of how they want to function in the world, or how they want to think or believe. So how do you find your way in that? And what do you do if you think differently? I mean, that was the questions I was thinking of bringing today that I appreciated.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Katie, you just made me think as well. It also gives me a different lens for thinking about and observing other people's behavior. That's so in my spiritual community, a Christian community, I might quite easily sort of attach like a moral value to everything that someone does. I might attribute this behavior that annoys me to some sort of moral failure, or to a character flaw or something like that. And so it's been helpful for me to step back, and it gives me a little bit more space to think about it in terms of that togetherness, and to think, oh, what if I, there's a moral component to this behavior, but what if I think about it as anxious? Or, that just gives me a bit more breathing room and many more options in terms of how I then want to function. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I'll let you put in your 2 cents, Dixie.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes into, I had so many examples, but I have 2. We'll see if I get to both, but deconstruction, at least in sort of and we don't have to only talk about Christianity today, because I think this applies to different religions, but in the Christian world these days, deconstruction is quite popular, where people sort of pull apart the faith and the beliefs that they sort of grew up with, and where do they land? And often they land with not having that faith anymore. And I was thinking about, I mean, despite being a pastor's wife, I am like a lifelong doubter. It's just kind of part of me. And I remember, as one does in grade 10, 11, having some major doubts about God. And of course, you just dig deep into the theology and apologetics and study the hell out of this, right? To figure it out. But so that's what I've just been a doubter and a learner and a studier. And I mean, be a curious person is the kinder way of saying that. But I also had space in my family to question and to learn and to read. And I really appreciated that. And so there's some pretty popular influencers these days who maybe go through this deconstruction process and then put it on YouTube for the world to see. And my husband was watching one once, and he's like, oh, I had that question 15 years ago. It's like the questions aren't the issue, but I was thinking, questions in an anxious context, questions in a place where no, that's not okay to ask that. I think it just locks things down for the people who doubt and for the people who are certain. And so my thought is, in thinking about beliefs and faith, what is the role of anxiety in a system to keep flexibility in where people land? Does that make sense?
I think so, because I mean, theory would say that we need some anxiety in the system to stir it up. When you were talking, I was thinking about, I don't know enough about the content of what you talked about, but I was thinking about earlier today, we were in a training program at Living Systems, and the idea of differentiation is the act of defining a self in the face of togetherness. So as a person is up against the congregation or any belief, any group or belief system, how does one either thoughtfully or reactively butt up against that togetherness and decide, what do I think here? And I think there would be a billion examples of people who do it more thoughtfully and more reactively. So I think that's the usefulness to me, is that lens of thinking about the usefulness in groups that have well-defined belief systems, hopefully, is I can get curious about them, do my own evaluation, and then decide, does this fit for me? What do I think about that? I mean, I think I don't want to be naive and say that there would be a billion other circumstances that would give individuals and different systems more or less freedom to do that. I imagine that there's lots of people that don't have some freedom to make a choice about that without some pretty severe consequences. But I think that is one of the way of theories, that individuality butting up against that togetherness.
Yeah, you've got me thinking about just that process. Like, what is the process by which we grow up in any context, and how much, even with deconstruction, that in lots of cases that I see, someone ends up in a position with a more kind of solid and mature kind of faith. But deconstruction can also, that kind of questioning process can also be quite reactive as well. So sort of like the teenager trying to kind of differentiate from parents, like there can be a lot of reactivity there. So like, what do we do with those questions? And are we kind of caught up in that fusion and that anxious kind of togetherness that we're talking about in that process? Or what does it take to kind of get a little bit of space even from our questions and be able to, question our questions even? What do we want to do with them? Or do they just, are they that anxious? Is it an anxious kind of questioning and pushing back that's kind of driving that process? But I'm really interested in how do we get some space to, from the togetherness in the growing up process. Yeah.
Matt, what do you watch that's useful in that? I mean, I'm putting you on the spot here, but thinking about what do you watch in a system or a group or a congregation, that factors that might allow more of that space?
I mean, this is probably not what you were thinking, but if I was to, something I found really helpful to watch is myself when I'm trying to teach my teenage kids to drive. Probably not at all what you were thinking when you asked the question. But I found that such an interesting experience where there's this goal where you're wanting to help your child learn to be able to navigate the roads for themselves. And there's this content that you need to pass on to them. So there's knowledge, things they need to know, even just like where's the high beam kind of switch that, the first time you realize you've never worked that out, or how to turn the air conditioning on or whatever. But there's also skills, lots like to pass on. And so for me, there's all these kind of links to kind of a religious kind of community kind of context or a Christian context, where I think about how do we help each other grow. But in both cases, there's a lot riding on it. So like teaching your kid to drive, like you're really confronted with the whole life or death kind of reality.
Yeah, there are real consequences if they don't get this right.
That's right. And so there might be times actually when you need to intervene and just jump in and take over. But you're also aware that it's so easy to just take over in a consistent kind of pattern, that giving all the directions, give it more revs up the hill, we need to change lanes here, put your blinker on, look over your shoulder, like everything, you're doing all the things. And I just became aware, I was teaching my daughter to drive, and I just became really aware. There was a moment when I asked her if she knew where we were when we were driving. We weren't far from home, and she didn't know. And it just caused me to reflect, of course she doesn't know, because I'm just always directing her where to go. She doesn't have to think about that. So how do I give her a little bit more space to start to think for herself and make some choices for herself, rather than me moving into that space all the time? And so then I think in my kind of church context, a similar kind of thing at play. Like there's a lot riding on it. There can be a lot of that anxious kind of togetherness and over-functioning from leaders and things. A desire to protect sometimes as well. Like, when do I need to step in here with this person to protect these other people? Like, is that a real thing? Like, what does that look like? But also like Dixie's thing of being able to ask questions, people having that space to kind of work things out for themselves, seems to me, if they don't get that, they might conform, that they follow the spiritual road rules, but they probably don't learn to navigate it for themselves. So that's I find it really helpful. I found it so helpful teaching my kids to drive, to look out for those things and then bring them across. Yeah.
And I think, Matt, that goes back to my question that I started with, my pitch, which was not really a pitch, it was a question, which is there something in theory and the journey of a faith practice or spiritual, whatever you want to call it, that encourages people to focus on self more than other? I mean, that driving example was a great example. What's it like to manage myself and my own anxiety around this process versus trying to just leave self and manage my daughter and how she's, I think you said daughter, but maybe that was my projection, and how she's going to kind of take on this challenge.
Yeah, there was a question in one of your recent podcasts with Samantha Stokesbury, where she was thinking about that role of the helper and how do you manage yourself. And she had a question around something like, where is my drive to help coming from? Is it coming from a real need that this person has, or is it coming from my from inside my kind of anxiety that's coming from within me? And so I think if I'm thinking about a religious community or a church, if I was working with a pastor, like that kind of thing is something I'd be looking out for, is how do you work out whether this drive to kind of get really involved in this situation is coming from somewhere that's kind of based in some convictions and some thoughtfulness and some calm, slowing things down, noticing what's going on in the bigger picture and the part you play, or how do you work out whether actually there's something going on inside you that's anxious, that's kind of giving you this kind of drive and energy to get really involved.
Yeah, it reminds me of that Bowen quote of that a good mother is in touch with the reality needs of her child. Like, I mean, that has been one of the most useful quotes to me as a parent, to just step back and say, what's happening in me? What's the situation I'm faced with? So I appreciate that from like a parenting context, a group context, a leadership context. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, for as much as I appreciated that space to learn and read and question, it's a little different offering that to my children. It's been and I have to I have to be very intentional about, especially when you have two parents with like master's degrees, basically in sort of religious thinking, right? I'm like, don't you know? You got parents that have figured it out, but really that's not the point. Yeah. So what is the challenge for me if I really value this openness, how do I offer it to my kids?
Yeah. And under tension, you're driving. I put a quote that I wrote down from Bowen Theory's Secrets that talks about the challenge of thinking of these topics. I was thinking of this Trump Pope fight during emotionality, right? Like Kerr's quote is, during emotional turmoil, the influence of the subcortical circuits on the higher reaches of the brain are stronger than the other way around, making it difficult for higher parts of the brain to control emotion feeling charged impulses. So when this occurs, reasoning is co-opted by emotionality, and reasoning is impaired and feelings dictate behavior. I was thinking about that quote, even Matt, when you were saying giving people the space, because our brain actually will be challenged in functioning reasonably if we're in a space of tension and turmoil and intensity.
And I think you were saying earlier, Katie, that kind of anxiety can give an energy that can be helpful for doing some important things. But I think like in that context you're talking about with Trump and the Pope, how do we work out whether this is something we need to react to or want to react to? And, when we bring our anxious kind of reaction into it, which seems to have happened a fair bit.
Globally.
Yeah. I mean, our papers,
the meme content alone.
Our media is full of it. And we're on the other side of the world, so it's literally globally. But what part does that play in the ongoing kind of system? I mean, part of me thinks, like, what if we just all didn't react? Like, you know?
Or gave ourselves a little space at least.
Yeah.
I think knowing, I think about this quote and knowing that when I get pretty tense, my brain is just going to be working differently. And so just having that knowledge, on a good day, I can recognize it before it totally goes offline and I'm making statements that might not be my most mature.
Yeah, like the driving. It's like that thing where you write the really long emotional email in the heat of the moment, but don't send it, and you get the chance to kind of, you come back to it and you just think, oh wow, you can actually see the intensity, sitting in there. And
I was actually, what that made me think of is this practice that with the advent of AI, maybe this should have been on the Patrick episode, but like that people are pausing and running their emails through AI. And I thought, yes, I get that, but it is interrupting.
Yeah.
It is interrupting. Now, hopefully they reread the email and see if it resonates with their thinking, but it is interrupting that reactivity and at least putting some time and a triangle, maybe, however we think about that.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I mean, I wanted to bring I'm going to drop questions and not examples, but I had a silly example, but I'm not going to use that one. I was thinking about triangles and the role that a pastor, a religious leader, what role they have in a triangle, how they think about that role. I just would be interested in either of your thoughts on that idea of the function. I was thinking specifically around like family life. Like church can be a really important role in family life, and that triangle is pretty important for some people.
Can you describe the kind of triangle you're imagining as you talk about pastor, church, family life? What might it look like?
So I was thinking about in my own family where I know that my grandmother had a pretty important decision to make and went to the priest before she went to her husband. And thinking about how she needed to get that approval, for lack of a better word, or the okay from the priest. I think she would have changed her thinking as she aged. We had some pretty funny conversations about it, but that was a really important triangle, and it would have pros and cons, I imagine, for their marriage.
Yeah, and it strikes me that the act of going to the priest could like, it's not the action of doing it. Like, it could be a more differentiated thing than going to a husband.
Yeah.
The priest could have been a little bit further outside the system and maybe able to be a bit more neutral and objective. It could be quite helpful, but it doesn't sound like that's what you're describing. It sounds like a little less self thing. Yeah.
I think she was trying to get him on her side.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it the layer of, say, for me, with like Christian faith and teaching, that there can be a really strong drive to think that the Christian thing to do as the pastor or priest in that example is to get really involved and to help these people sort out the problem. But when I think about it in terms of triangles, it just it helps me kind of just step back a little bit and think about, well, what if I related in this triangle on the assumption that I could be helpful here, but that actually these two maybe have the capacity to work through this themselves. That might change the kind of involvement and the intensity that I bring to it. That's not natural for me. Like, if I see, a conflict, like, I'm like a moth to the flame. Like, I've got to move this thing out and make everything okay. But that's one way that Bowen theory is really helpful for me living out my faith. Yeah.
And when you have that principle, but the family really, really wants you to tell them what to do or tell that kid what to do.
Yeah.
Don't meet their expectations. And
yes. Yeah, I've had that happen.
Well, and how, for lack of this is probably an inappropriate word to use here, but like how seductive that invitation, how attractive, maybe I'll say attractive, how attractive that invitation is to be for another in that way.
Yeah.
Any leader. I mean, I think a therapist could easily fall into that
Yeah.
hole.
Yeah,
Tell me
definitely.
what to do.
Yeah. And it
Mm.
looks like, from a Christian perspective, it looks so Christian, like to be concerned for reconciliation and, all out, like it seems to tie into our deepest priorities and values. I was thinking that a lot of the different patterns of reactivity that Dixie kind of worked through at the beginning, I was thinking earlier just how, a lot of them a lot of our reactivity can seem like a really Christian or a really moral or a really
Mm-hmm.
helpful thing to do. And that makes it really, I think, yeah, like you say, seductive, or like just so easy to assume that that's the right thing to do and kind of just get drawn right into it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's, so, I think of people in ministry that I work with, and, I think of a woman I work with who, is so responsible. She's like super competent and responsible, but finds herself kind of functioning, for all the people around her. And that just often looks like a really Christian thing to do. Or someone else I work with who has this real drive to get on the same page. Like, if there's a difference in thinking, let's sort it out and kind of work out what the truth is. And that kind of looks, like really Christian and spiritual, and it doesn't look reactive. It looks really calm and logical and rational. But just has been interesting for me to notice how much those drives, which are bound up with our values and our convictions, can be kind of infused with that anxious energy as well.
Matt, that just got my brain going in so many different places. One, I'm happy to not be a pastor, but two, just I just think that's so interesting to think about. How does one get clear on how they, I don't know if this is the right word, interpret theology or think about how their principles are going to show up in their behavior, and then potentially dealing with the pushback, right? I'm thinking of, you gave that example of a woman I could name a billion women who kind of give and think they're being a good Christian woman, right? I'm going to give of myself and not, not have anything for me. And the challenge of, talking to someone about what might it be like to get clear what you're wanting to do and not wanting to do here. So, that's a really interesting challenge, I would think.
And then there's the getting clear on paper is one thing, but then I think, like, your comment about not wanting, or glad you're not a pastor or something, like, because most of my work now is kind of coaching and pastoral supervision, and it's just so much more contained. Like, there's an hour Zoom conversation, and then we get out of the chat, and I might bring it with me a little bit, but I'm not going to. There's people are spread all over. I don't run up into them up the shops.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing their kids in the schoolyard. I'm not in the thick of the soup, and so it is easier to keep a bit more objectivity, I find, in this work I'm doing, compared to when I was in a church as the minister, where it's just so much of and the soup is like beautiful. That's part of the beauty of the community, right? Like, you want to be in the thick of it, but it makes it so hard to kind of get that clarity. And Jenny Brown has a quote, something like, "The goal is not to eradicate the togetherness. The goal is just to rise up a little out of the anxious fusion."
Good job, Jenny. That's well
I
said.
love that image of just kind of getting out a little bit, but that's really hard to do, I think, in a religious or Christian context. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, I wonder if the intensity can be more. I mean, if religion is one of these sort of taboo topics, right? Is because it is, in theory, looking at these like capital T truths, these like big ideas of human nature, and does that capital T-ness how does that up the intensity of what of the experience for people
Yeah.
within a group and between religions too. right between different perspectives.
Yeah, it's like the teaching to drive thing again. There's a lot riding on it. It feels really weighty and increases the energy.
Yeah. And how do you get interested? It made me think of, I didn't come with an example, but that comment right there just made me think of that book or movie, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Has anyone read the book, watched the movie?
Yeah.
No. Oh, please indulge. It's a little girl who goes on an exploration kind of directed by a teacher to say, does she want to have a religion? And her mom was rejected by her Christian parents because she married a Jewish man. And so she was cut off from her grandparent. I could probably do now that I'm talking about this whole episode. But I think even, that family sort of didn't give that kiddo, this is my opinion, a lot of space to think for herself when she had some natural curiosity to say, I want to understand this. She did a great experiment. She went to multiple different faiths. She tried out different things. She, tried to have conversations with people. And, how does a parent manage their own anxiety? That's why that driving example, like, how do they manage their own anxiety around this to create opportunities for their kids to be curious about this?
And similar with the driving, I mean, if this is for me, my understanding is that my Christian faith is a way of living in line with a reality that is true. And so for me, there is a lot at stake in these questions. And like with the driving, it's not like you don't just go to sleep in the passenger seat as the parent and just say, go for your life. So it's kind of that wrestle of, how do I help my kid navigate life, but stay, operate within what I think is kind of the grain of the universe, of reality. Does that make sense? So, yeah.
The Jenny Brown quote, I think I have the technological skill to put this up on the screen here, but there's a great cartoon that I found that looks at the history of Christianity, and it looks like a family diagram, and just more and more and more until there's like 80 different little lines, right? And then someone's teaching and pointing and said, see right here, this is when we finally got it absolutely correct. This is us. And I'm like, I think that looking at one's family history, looking at history of your church, your congregation, of your religion throughout time is one way to kind of sneak your head up out of the soup and just get some perspective on the processes and on the content of the veracity of the claims. Yeah. Do we have takeaways? Further, Katie, do you have more questions for people to
I
ponder?
could go up another question, but I just wanted to make sure Matt had his example. If I asked a question and you moved into example, I didn't know if you had another one you wanted to share.
Yeah, no, the car one was, well, here's another thought that was part of my pitch, which is that, I mean, I find that Bowen theory helps me to kind of step back and notice what's going on in the context of my spiritual kind of reality or my faith. But also that my faith is a real resource for me then in how I want to, where do I get the steadiness from if I'm not going to lean quite as hard on those togetherness forces and getting everyone on the same page and getting everyone doing the right thing and getting everyone to believe, all of that. If I'm not going to lean on that for my steadiness, so my example is like even just a handrail, like what have I got to lean on that keeps me steady here? And I find that actually the great resource for me is my faith. It gives me a whole lot of things to lean on, and in particular, Jesus to lean on, who I think can hold my weight. And so I don't have to, when I'm grabbing hold of that, I don't have to lean quite as heavily on relationship stability and sameness to keep me stable.
That's so useful, Matt. So my question, I sent Dixie, I probably could have sent it to you too. I read this Substack by Derek Thompson, who's a US journalist, thinking about, I think it was tied to this stuff with the Pope, but thinking about religion in America. And Dixie can link it in the show notes because I think it's so interesting. But he talked about this perceived increase in religion and gave lots of statistics, which I'm not going to get into it. But he noted this measure that comes out across multiple studies about people associated with having a religious practice, and that's a pretty broad definition, also report being happier. And the guest on the interview, which I probably should have known that person's name, but I didn't write it down, tied this into hope, like the idea that the hope that religion offered. And it really kind of tied into what I heard you just say, is that having something that a belief system, which can give you some principles to think about hope, that was the key that was linking, or the hypothesis, I guess, on this idea around people within a religious practice or association reporting happiness. I didn't know if you were familiar with that research or had any thinking about it.
I've seen similar kinds of research come out over the years, and yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, I mean, what it looks like for me in a situation is I'll often, when I'm going into a situation, whether it's a pastoral one or just a coaching session or presenting or something where I know my anxiety is going to be a bit elevated and I know what my reactivity might look like, I'll write down some of my convictions that I want to take in. And in fact, I did it before this. I think I wrote down something like, God is here, so everything's going to be okay. And that is one of my deepest convictions. That's one of the promises in the Christian faith, is that God's not going to let go of me, of his creation. He's not going to give up on his creation, and that one day everything will be okay. And to be able to keep grabbing hold of that when going on a podcast is like really the anxiety levels go up, right? Or moving into a really stressful pastoral kind of situation and trying to navigate that, the stress levels, are so high. But to have that kind of conviction to hold on to, that I find that holds me steady. Yeah.
And I can just parallel that to just the thinking of the usefulness for that for a clinician too. Like a clinician getting clear on their principles of how they want to show up, or a parent, like getting clear, what are the principles that guide me in my life, and how useful that can be in kind of grounding our functioning, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's Bowen theory, but
yeah, I think it is actually. I had a quote. I wrote down some quotes, but I don't know if it came out. My printer broke. I think it's in family evaluation about the power of having a conviction that's strong enough to help you resist the kind of emotional push and pull. And then the language is sort of like almost like the courage, to have the courage of your convictions. But yeah, I wish I'll see if I can find it and send it through, and maybe you can stick it on the website. But
I don't know, the Matt Steele version of it was pretty good.
My takeaway, I mean, I wanted to say that, like, this is probably not the right phrase, but my family sort of like orbits around religion for generations. It's just something very, very present. I remember the first time I did my family diagram presentation, and the supervisor she said, I just see a lot of pastors and a lot of musicians. And I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. But I was thinking through my, family research over the years, I probably have, like, including my kids' generation, 5 generations of a little bit of understanding of sort of the religious story of my family, and the alliances and the breaks. But I think it's just can be a useful thing for people to look at their family history, see what they discover, what do you learn, what surprises you, how does it inform your own beliefs. It's been a fun little project for me. Yeah, Matt, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm just interested in continuing to think about that interplay between the spiritual reality and an emotional reality, and seeing how each of them is kind of helpful for me in navigating kind of each reality. And so, yeah, in a kind of a religious context, to keep being able to do that work of kind of trying to rise up a little out of the togetherness force and get a bit clear on how I want to manage myself in this situation. I think there's this, the way that I was thinking about it is my work to be more differentiated actually helps me to be more like Jesus, and so I don't know what Bowen would have thought of that, but I like that. Yeah.
Well, we did get it through the whole episode on religion and not talk about the ninth concept idea in Bowen theory. So maybe that's a future episode that we need to, maybe that's a teaser. There we go. A little teaser for folks that don't know about the ninth concept idea. It's not out there yet. So maybe that's the teaser, but that was interesting. I was curious if it was going to come up today.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Matt, for joining us from tomorrow to talk with us today about all of this. Standard Australia joke, right?
I'm glad I got to be part of it, though. It's great. The joke as well as the podcast. Yeah.
Yes.
I am going to add in that if you would like to support our efforts, our behind the scenes efforts, and help make this podcast possible, we will link our donation to the Ko-fi site, where you can buy us a coffee and help with some of the functioning behind the podcast. Thank you to those of you who have already contributed. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to learn more about Bowen theory, there are lots of places to do this. Please check out Living Systems website. It's program application time. So if you're interested, some ideas here took your interest, please check out the programs that we have to offer, as well as I want to make sure to link you back to Matt's organization, the Changeroom, as well as we have ministry programs that we offer both at Living Systems, and Matt also is faculty, as he said, at the Family Systems Institute in Australia, where they have lots of modules in their ministry program and just in Bowen theory in general. And the final little plug I'm going to put in is that we are recording this before the Faith Conference at the Bowen Center, but it will be coming out 1 week after the Faith Conference at the Bowen Center. So I imagine if you're interested, you could get recordings to that. So those are all the places where if these ideas stirred something in you, you can take them and learn more.
And it'll be all in the show notes, just to keep me busy. I hope those of you who've listened today will keep doing your own thinking and observing as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.